Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you this morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I am doing well, and once again excited about this conversation because we're going to talk about parenting and child rearing again
Right.
today.
More about parenting, but especially the difference. We're going to talk about the difference between parenting children versus raising children. Something that we talked about in our last podcast.
Right. Yeah, in our last podcast, we kind of introduced this idea of lighthouse parenting. I really like that model. It looks
Mhm.
very promising as a new model, but again, like you said, talking about sort of the difference between parenting and raising children or child rearing. And we
Right.
mentioned last time that just in the names alone, you can see where the emphasis lies. Parenting, the focus is on what the parent is doing, while child rearing, the focus is on the child. And so
Exactly.
we're going
Mhm.
to kind of review that a little bit today and talk about just some of the pitfalls and challenges that we're having with all of this.
Yeah, around the 1970s, around the middle of the 1970s, there seemed to be this shift from how to raise children to how to parent children. What is the best parenting? So the emphasis, as you say, the emphasis shifted from raising children to parenting children. And last week in our last podcast, we kind of agreed that there's no best approach
Right.
to raising children. There isn't a single way that's best for every family or for every child. But there are a few guidelines, and we wanted to talk about some of those guidelines in this podcast. Um, because, as we mentioned last week, there are literally thousands of books, tens of thousands of books,
Right.
and millions of advice columns and videos about how to raise children. And yet, with all that advice and with all that planning and with all the so-called experts, um, things seem to be getting worse. We have lots of advice, but things are getting worse. We have kids who function with impunity now and a sense of entitlement, and we talk about them not being ready for the workplace. So, and this increase in mental illness among children. So, though there's a lot of advice out there, it doesn't seem like things are going well.
Right.
And one of the things we touched on last week was what was parenting style, because when you raise children, you're going to use whether you know it or not, or admit it or not, you're going to use a certain parenting style. We all do.
Right.
And the parenting style is based on two factors. One is how responsive you are to your children. And the second factor is how demanding you are. What are your expectations? So
Right.
there's some combination of responsiveness and demandingness. And
Right.
in the 1960s, um, this woman, Diana Baum, oh, I can never say her name, Baumrind, from a college professor, psychology professor, identified four types of parenting based on these two factors.
Right.
And most of you have heard about these: permissive parenting, neglectful parenting, the authoritarian parent, who it's my way or the highway. And everybody agrees that the best approach is what is called the authoritative approach, where you achieve some balance between how responsive you are to your children and how demanding you are of your children. And I
Right.
think that's what we want to talk about today: is how do you get this balance? How do you get this just right? Because you need some combination of tolerance and forgiveness, but also expectations and demandingness.
Absolutely. And, while those four were sort of highlighted and emerged in the literature and in common vernacular, really, in the 1960s, since then, there have been, so many other
Listen, right.
types of parenting styles. And again, as you said, they all have something to do with the amount of the demandingness and responsiveness.
Mhm.
And, there are those that fall into sort of a dubious a category of parenting
Right.
styles where there's very little of both, very little demanded from the child, and also not a lot of responding, or actually too much responding. Um,
Right.
so
Mhm.
you're responding to the child so much, but you're not really expecting anything back from them. And so we have a number of parenting styles that fall into that category, like attachment parenting,
Mhm.
um, gentle parenting. That's one of the newer ones. But all of these really, look like sometimes permissive parenting or some of those, the original four, but it's all about not really demanding or expecting a lot from your kid, but really responding to them in just about any whimper, any movement, anything that the child does, elicits a major response from the parent.
Right. So if you're a young parent and you're looking for that, what is the best parenting approach? There isn't a best parenting approach. And when anybody tries to sell you one, is that you should use gentle parenting, or you should use free range parenting, or you should use be very cautious, because there are these four styles. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to get drawn into a particular parenting style, because it may not be right for your child. And we call these dubious parenting styles because um, we would urge caution before you adopt them. They're too little, there are too few expectations, and way too much tolerance and acceptance and responsiveness to the child.
Right.
Now, there's another set of parenting styles that are downright harmful.
Right. Yeah. Like, a number of years ago, I remember the Tiger Mom
Right. Yeah.
came out. And, that is sort of the reverse, where there's a whole lot demanded of the child, but not as much response to the child. And so,
Right. Mhm.
some of the child's needs actually may not be met in some of these with some of these parenting styles, but there's a lot of expectation from them. So you have like Tiger Mom. Or tiger parenting. There's a narcissistic type of parenting where the parents sort of expect the child to basically serve and meet all of the parents' needs. These kinds of, to some extent, helicopter and snowplow parenting fall into
Right.
that category
Mhm.
because, the expectation, the parent is sort of demanding, perfection and, wanting to make sure that the child doesn't experience failure or experience any harm or anything like that.
Mhm.
But again, still not a lot of responsiveness to the child, primarily just expecting that perfection from them.
That's right. And all of these, whether it's tiger parenting, helicopter parenting, there's this thing about we're in this together. And what is this? We're in this together. You and I, you can almost hear a parent saying, you and I are in this together, and we're going to make sure that you reach the pinnacle, that you are the best, that you achieve whatever. That's not a good approach to parent. You're not in this together. That's where we go back to the lighthouse or the coach, the lighthouse approach to parenting. That yes, the parent is there, but you're standing guard and you're stationary. You're not involved in the day-to-day play-by-play activities of the child. The coach doesn't go on to the field and become a pitcher or become a batter. The coach stays in the dugout. And that's kind of what parents should do. They should stay in the dugout, stay on the island, and let the children learn how to do things on their own. That's the balance that we're trying to achieve here.
Absolutely. And in our conversations, I don't know if listeners will be surprised to know that you and I do sit around sometime and just talk about this stuff. But
Not
we,
as much as we should, but
right.
yeah,
But we've been talking about how it seems as though a lot of what's happening lately is, as you said at the start of this podcast, there's all of this information out there. There's all of these
right.
books, there's all of these blogs and posts and forums and all this stuff out there. But we still have all of these problems. And it just feels as though, we grab onto something that is good. Authoritative parenting is a really good
Right.
balance, as you said earlier, between that demandingness and the
Mhm.
responsiveness. It's a very good balance. But what happens, I think, is that sometimes we grab onto one part of it so tight and we let other pieces of it go that
Right.
we start moving in these other directions.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like whether it's you want to go with gentle parenting or helicopter parenting or whatever the case may be, you can see where there's some remnants of authoritative parenting in that style.
Mhm.
But the problem is that so many other pieces have been omitted. you know,
Right.
some of those expectations. It is perfectly appropriate for a parent to have expectations of their kid.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Now, the way that you communicate that makes a difference. The way that it looks will make a difference.
Right.
But there is nothing wrong with having expectations for your child and
Mhm.
expecting your child to meet those expectations on their own through their own volition and their own effort without
Yeah.
you having to sit there next to them and do it. And so, despite all of this stuff out there, we go in these different directions and we grab onto these different things and we still end up with like, one major problem is this epidemic of like under socialized kids. Risha, how many times do we talk to parents of kindergartners or kindergarten teachers, and these kids just don't know how to interact with other people?
Right. That's right. Because as you say, despite all the information, as an educator and a therapist, we're concerned about these. There's kind of four groups of kids who are confronting everybody. They're confronting us. They're confronting parents. They're certainly confronting teachers. I mean,
Yeah.
schools are very, very concerned about these kids coming into the building. And as you say, this first group of kids who are under socialized. I mean, they enter the school building and they're almost impossible to deal with. You
Yeah.
know, and part of that is that there are kids who enter our public schools at 3, 4, 5, 6 years of age who have no idea how to act in public. They have no idea that they're clueless. They're not taught that people have expectations, that when they go to school, they're going to be expected to follow the directions of the teacher, that sometimes you have to do what you're told, whether you want to or not, that you have to respect the rights of others. There are kids who enter school and they seem to be unaware of these expectations.
Yeah. And it is pervasive, I'll say back in the day, we used
Right,
to talk about this primarily with toddlers and preschoolers and kindergartners. And
right.
that's still an issue. However, we have middle schoolers who behave
Mhm.
this way. We have
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have high
Mhm.
school students who behave this
Right.
way. And
Hmm.
they just expect to and there's some of this falls into some of the other categories of kids we're going to talk about, but you know, they just expect that they're going to get whatever they want.
Right,
And if
right.
they don't want to do something, they just don't have to do it.
That's right. Yeah, they enter and they have the same attitude as though school is just like home, that they can do what they want, that they may or may not listen to the adult in the room, that the F-bomb is okay, that it's perfectly okay to throw the F-bomb. And if they want something, they simply take it. It doesn't, there's no respect for other people or other people's property. And that if hitting is okay, and that's one way to get things. So it's like they were never taught that that this stuff is not okay, that
Yeah. And I think that as I was saying a minute ago, with, there's some remnants of authoritative parenting in some of this.
Mhm, mhm.
You can see where it began, where parents were being supportive of their kids and, I believe you. I want, tell me
Mhm,
what's going on and I'll believe you and we'll work
mhm.
together to solve these problems. But it's gone to this sort of pathological extent to
Extreme, yeah.
where now the
Mhm.
child is the only one that's correct.
Right.
How many? I was talking to a teacher not long ago, and there was a student who was, doing some of these exact things, cursing in the classroom and all this kind of stuff. The teacher asked him to do something, and he explodes.
Right.
And then when they call the mom, the first thing the mom says is, "Well, what did the teacher say?"
Right.
No, it doesn't matter
What
what the teacher said,
what
really.
did the
You
teacher do to
don't,
provoke the child, right?
right. You
Yeah.
don't behave that way.
Right.
That
Mhm.
you can't be in a classroom if you're going to behave that way.
Right.
And kids just aren't learning that. And again, I think the original source was a good place, a good
Mhm.
idea where parents are listening and believing their kids and stuff. But it has gone to that pathological extent to where now, okay, now your child can do no wrong. That that,
Right.
that doesn't make sense.
That's right. Because so we have this first group of kids who just haven't been taught. Okay. But
Right.
then you have this second group of kids that we call entitled youngsters. Okay. And we
Right.
certainly have an increase in entitled youngsters. Um, what they, there are kids who feel that they are equal or have the same rights as adults. They're equal to have the same rights as adults, that they're not obligated to respect teachers or coaches or any other authority figures. And one of my favorites is they will respect adults only if adults show them respect. I want to lose my mind.
Richard, I saw a third grader, and this guy, he's physically he's even small for a third grader. So he's just this little guy, and he sits in my office and he is adamant that teachers should ask kids if they want to do work before the teacher gives them work to do. No, the teacher should ask
Well,
us if we want to do it first. I'm like, no, what do you mean? These are things you have to learn. Yeah, but what if we don't want to learn it? If we don't want to learn it, then the teacher shouldn't make us have to do it.
he did not say that.
He did. And
I love it.
you can't, and they're so fixed because, again, perhaps it comes from a good, an original good source.
Mm-mm.
If their home life is you only have to do what you're really interested in,
What,
or
what, what you want to do. Hmm.
that's where you get those perspectives. And if and the parent, and you think about all the self-help books, and I blame our profession to some extent. You read all the self-help books that say, well, there shouldn't be anything in your life unless it brings you joy, or you shouldn't do anything if it doesn't make you
Right.
happy. What
Mm.
world is that?
I don't know where that is. It's some cartoon somewhere or some, no, I don't know. I
It's
don't know.
not the real world. I mean,
Yeah.
there are lots of things that we all have to do that we don't want to do, but
Yep,
we have to do it,
exactly. But there are kids who feel that if they don't want to, they shouldn't have to.
right?
And if the teacher does make me do it, or the coach does make me do it, then I'll just go home and I'll tell my parents, and my parents will take care of it.
Right.
This happens all the time.
All the time.
Schools are getting sued by parents who say, well, I don't want my child to run laps. I don't want my child to run wind spin. You know, this idea that I'll go home and tell my parents and my parents will take care of it. That's the entitled youngster. And then we have a third group of kids who are having these explosive outbursts in school. Now, this could well be a true mental health issue. We know that kids who have Tourette's and autism and frequently will lose control of themselves. But I think we need to be very careful about attributing all temper tantrums or explosive outbursts to mental illness, because not all outbursts are due to mental illness. Sometimes it's just bad behavior. And so I think even with the possibility of a pathological cause, I think we have to be careful that we make sure that we're not just dealing with a kid who's trying to get what he wants by having a temper tantrum or by throwing desks or throwing chairs in a classroom.
Right.
We got to
Right.
deal with these problems. We have to somehow deal with them decisively.
Absolutely. And the fourth category is about mental illness and mental health problems. But, yeah, with this third group, we're talking about kids. There are groups of kids who behave that way, but they don't
Mhm.
have a mental health condition.
Right.
It's in part manipulative. It's in
Yeah.
part under socialized. It's
Mhm.
in part, they just can't they can't handle not getting their way. And
Right.
that's not necessarily a mental illness,
That's right.
just because just because you're unhappy. We did a podcast not long ago on what was it, pathological demand
Oh,
of
God.
if I
Gosh.
get it. I think I get it where they're coming from. But as we talked about in that podcast, that's a condition, that's a set of symptoms that
Mhm.
is that accompanies another diagnosis.
Right.
It's
Right.
a diagnosis in and of itself. You don't
Yeah.
have a
Mhm.
kid who's otherwise perfectly healthy that,
Mhm.
well, he has pathological demand avoidance. No, your kid needs to do what he's asked to do.
Right. Hmm.
If you place a demand on him, if you place an expectation on him, he needs to work to meet that expectation. If obviously, assuming it's reasonable and that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know where we're getting into this. Well, he doesn't really feel like it, so you can't really ask him to do anything. If you ask him to do something, you have to be careful because no, No.
Yeah, we have to be careful with these children because I don't know, because they're delicate or something.
Right.
No, they need the expectations, they need the demands, they need to know that they have to do certain things. It just comes with the territory, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the last group are this notion of mental illness that we have this epidemic of mental illness, especially anxiety, depression, and ADHD.
Mhm.
About 20% of people have some type of mental illness, mild to severe, mostly mild. Um, but we're approaching the 40 and 50% range for some mental illnesses in teenagers.
Right.
And it can't be that 50% of teenagers have pathological anxiety or depression or any other mental illness. It's just it those numbers are just not accurate. And yet 46% are supposedly mentally ill. No, they're not mentally ill. Okay. And the other thing is, okay, life might be a little bit more difficult today, but is it really that difficult? Is it really that much more difficult today than it was 30 or 40 years ago? Is it really mental illness? Are these mental illnesses, or are these kids just running into life like we all did? I mean,
Mhm.
I bumped into life. I stubbed my toes on life a lot when I was growing up and
Yeah.
got in trouble for it. I'm not sure that what these kids are experiencing is any different. I don't think it's mental illness. Maybe we're raising children who don't have enough determination or resilience, or my goodness, where's the resilience? Where's the dust yourself off and go try again? You remember that dad, the girl came home and I'm not going to have playing time. And he looked at her and said, work harder, and walked away. I mean, that's what if you want to play more, work harder. If you don't want to work harder, then drop out.
Right.
So I'm
So,
not sure that this generation is really that different than previous generations. And I don't think they have rates of mental illness that are 30 and 40%.
right. And that certainly isn't to downplay those who do have mental health problems. I mean,
Exactly. Right.
there are students who have those concerns and issues, and they should be, they need treatment and they need support and all that kind of stuff. But, we also have to, part of treatment. I just talked to a parent about this yesterday. Part of treatment is teaching resilience. Part of
Right.
teaching treatment is, what, you have these challenges, you have this anxiety, you have these things that are difficult for you. But when you go to the store, nobody else is going to know that. So you have to be able to cope with things. You have to be able to deal with some of these things. And so
Right.
part of treatment is building resilience and building coping strategies for managing some of those things. You can't
Right.
just say, well, I have anxiety, so can't do anything about it. And everybody just needs, I mean, I need to start wearing a t-shirt that says I have anxiety,
Yeah, wear
it
color-coded
doesn't work
t-shirts
that
or
way.
something. Right. No, no, the world is not nearly as forgiving. And so we have sort of these epidemics of these kinds of kids who are really making schools more difficult and organizations more difficult and parenting more difficult. Um, what we would what we would humbly recommend. Um, my children, my children are beginning to have children, and as I watch my children deal with their children, I guess I would ask them to say, these are your obligations. If I were to give I don't give my kids much advice because they don't take it. But if I were to give my kids advice, it would be, this is what you have to do as a parent. You have to raise a child who is kind, thoughtful, and considerate of others. You have to raise a child who knows that he or she is not the center of the universe. Please don't make my grandchildren the center of the universe. It's not good for them. You have to raise a child who can manage most of life things before they leave elementary school. You should be pretty self-sufficient by the time you leave elementary school. Your middle school teachers are going to expect you to be able to manage things on your own.
Right.
I don't care whether parents like that or not. That's the way the world works, and that's the way the world should work, because a 12 or 13-year-old child should be able to manage his or her life. You
Mhm.
should know your assignments, where your possessions are, what you need for class, what you need for sports, whatever it is, you should be able to take care of that yourself. Yeah, and the last is to teach them how to do it themselves. I don't care whether it's dishes or clothes or car, it doesn't matter. Teach them how to do it themselves. That's the idea of the coach or the lighthouse. parent is a lighthouse. Okay.
Right.
So
So
that's your obligation, and that hasn't changed. You still have that obligation to raise those kind of children.
absolutely. Remember the goal of parenting, the goal of raising children is to raise people into decent human beings.
Yeah,
And,
that's right.
and to
Decent adults.
that's sort
Right.
of the base,
Mhm.
just raise decent human beings. And part
Right.
of that is that they can take care of themselves, that they can be kind and thoughtful of others, that we were in out of town this past weekend and kind of walking around, and it is remarkable to me how many people, you're walking on a sidewalk and one step to the side and you're in the road, and
Right.
you're walking down the sidewalk and there's people coming towards you, and they don't crunch, they don't adjust how they are in any way to
Right.
accommodate somebody else walking by the other direction.
Right.
And it's
Right.
like, just be aware of what's going on around you. You know,
Mhm.
be aware of, like, if I take a step this way, I'm going to be on the road. So could you just provide a little bit of space as we're
Mhm.
as we're passing,
Right.
passing by? But people don't even pay attention to those kind of things, and we're not teaching. So many people aren't even teaching their kids to be aware of some of that stuff, and
That's
that's
right.
part of being a decent human being.
Awareness of others, and that others also have rights. You're not the only one who has rights. So here's our advice. This would be our advice to new parents. And there's only two pieces. Number one, decide what you want to accomplish by the time they leave your house at 18. But theoretically, kids leave at 18. I know that some don't, but they leave at 18, go to college or go to work. Do you want character or achievement? Because many parents, they just want achievement and they'll do character later. Okay. Do you want external control or self-control? Do you want dependence or independence? And I
Right.
think most people would say character, self-control, and independence. Well,
Right.
then raise your child to accomplish those things. And you can't do it for them. You have to help them get there. The
Right.
second thing is, and I think parents forget this, if you remember one thing, please remember that parenting is child rearing is in two acts. What you do from birth to puberty and what you do from puberty to adulthood, from the onset of puberty. Because from birth to puberty, you're doing attachment parenting. You,
Mhm.
you want your child to be close. You want to be close to your child, not do for your child, but you want to be close to your child. You want the lighthouse to be close. You want the coach to be close. Okay. From puberty to adolescence, you have to start withdrawing and you have to start detaching, because if you don't detach, your child is never going to become independent. They're going to remain dependent on you. And there was some YouTube video I was watching the other day. One in five parents, 1 in 5 students bring their parents to a job interview. Now, we're talking about 22, 23, 24-year-old adults who are bringing their parents to a job interview. That's you haven't detached,
Right.
and it's long overdue. Also, external versus internal control. When children are little, they need a lot of external control. You have to be there to control them. But when they get older, they need to develop their own control. And then self-centered to other-centered. When children are young, all children are a little bit self-centered. But as they mature, they have to become other-centered.
Mhm.
And that too is your task. So remember that what you do with young children to get them to puberty, and then it has to switch, it has to shift once they get to puberty and they start to become an adult. You have to detach and they have to learn how to do things on their own.
Absolutely. So in no way are we suggesting that we go back to
No.
this 1950s style of punitive authoritarian parenting. A lot of parenting experts, put that in shutter quotes, a lot of parenting experts will advocate that. They want to go back to the good old days where, let's have spanking in schools, and if you just beat the kids enough, then they'll do what they're supposed to do. We're not at all talking about that. What we're talking about is encouraging parents to be mindful of the goal.
Mhm. Mhm.
not the goal right now, and not necessarily your specific goal that they get into X college or, whatever. The goal of raising decent human beings that are self-sufficient, that can make decisions for themselves, that are aware that they live within a society that they influence other people and that other people influence them, and that they're
Mhm.
not, as you said a moment ago, they're not the center of the world that everybody else caters to them. You know,
Right.
they have to recognize that they are part of a system, and people really have a hard time, especially here in the United States, because we're such an individualistic perspective type
Right.
of culture. We live in a system, and you have to be able to function in that system. And I think that far too much attention is paid to you know, just making sure that you get the good grades, or that you are successful at everything that you do. We're not teaching kids how to work in a system where that's just not realistic. You know, straight A's all the time isn't realistic.
No, somebody said, and I think it was Shaw, the guy who wrote the article in the Atlantic. He said, it's a short-term trade-off.
Yeah,
Um, when you seek a bumper sticker, my child goes to Harvard or my child goes to MIT. That's good, but don't trade that for a well-adjusted 35-year-old. That's not a good trade.
right.
Doing everything you can to get your child into the best college. Yes, you get bragging rights as a parent, but what's that child going to be like at 35?
Mhm.
Is he or she going to be a healthy, self-sufficient, kind and decent human being? I think
Right.
that's our obligation as parents. If kids make it to MIT, that's perfectly okay, but not at the price of being a decent person.
Right. Yeah. So we want to find balance in that demandingness and the responsiveness. You know, yes, we are huge advocates for teaching kids and explaining things, but you know what? Sometimes it is because I said so.
Yeah.
Why do I have to go to bed now? It is just time to go to bed. It is
You
just
know,
time to go to bed.
yeah, sometimes, it's okay to say no to your children. It's really good for everybody for you to every once in a while say no. And no is a complete sentence. You don't have to add anything to it. And sometimes because I said so is the correct response because it clarifies who's in charge.
Right.
I'm in charge here.
Right.
And because I said so, you need to understand that I'm the decision maker.
Right. Because
You're 8 years old.
so often, there are things that we need kids to do, and it's just because we need them to do it, not for some grand, because the world, is revolving in this direction, and we have to do this because the stars
Right.
are aligning this way. No,
Mhm.
because I need you to do this. I need you to put your shoes there. Why? Because that's where your shoes need to go.
Right. Right. Right.
That's it. There's no, you don't have to say, well, because you don't have to go into all this other stuff,
No, they don't.
especially if you've already gone through it 15 other, 15
You've probably
times.
already explained it to them 100 times. You don't need to keep explaining things. It's better for everybody if you just say, no, that's what we're going to do. And you're going to do it because that's the way we do it here.
Right, right.
Okay.
All right.
Um,
I, I,
yeah,
I
they're not equal to adults. Kids are not, you are not equal to the adults in your life. You have to earn that. And you have to earn that status. You don't get it because when you're 8 or 9 years old.
right. Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. I think that's it for today. Um, Obviously, there's so much more to be said about parenting, and we'll keep at it.
Yeah.
But we'd love to hear from you if you have questions or you have your own thoughts about any of this. We'd be
Yeah.
happy to share more. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.